The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the ranch house. Outside, the New Mexico winter wind howled through the pines, but in us, warmth filled the room where two generations sat facing each other across time itself. Jacob McCall, 83 years old, sat in his weathered leather chair, his hands gnarled like ancient oak roots resting on the armrests. His hair, once dark as midnight, now fell past his shoulders in waves of silver. His beard, thick and white as fresh snow, reached halfway down his chest, but his eyes remained sharp, gray as winter steel, and in them danced memories of a life lived on the edge of civilization. Across from him, his grandson James sat forward on the sofa, 16 years old with his whole life stretching before him like unmarked territory. In his hands, he held an object he had discovered that afternoon while rummaging through his grandfather's old trunk in the barn. A silver dollar, dated 1876, worn smooth in places from decades of handling. "Grandpa," James said, turning the coin over in his palm, "I found this in your old trunk. Why do you keep it separate from your other coins?" The old man's eyes focused on that silver disc, and for a moment he was no longer in the comfortable ranch house of 1921. He was somewhere else, somewhere cold and desperate, where every decision carried the weight of life and death. "That coin," Jacob said, his voice rough as creek gravel but steady as mountains, "bought my life, and the life of an entire people." James looked up, confusion written across his young face. $1? How could $1? "Sit back, boy," Jacob interrupted gently. "What I'm about to tell you isn't a short tale. It starts on the 2nd of November, 1876. I was 38 years old. The man you see now was a ghost back then, already dead inside, just going through the motions of survival." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Jacob's eyes grew distant, seeing through the walls of the present into the past. "Let me take you back to when I thought I had nothing left to live for. Back to the day I bought a woman for $1 silver and discovered that sometimes the things we pay the least for cost us the most and give us everything." The old man's voice changed, taking on the cadence of a storyteller, and James found himself pulled into a world that existed 45 years before he was born. In November of 1876, Jacob McCall was not a man. He was a shadow, a ghost who walked the high places where civilization feared to tread. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains knew him as Wolf, a name earned not through boasting, but through the simple truth of how he lived. Alone, silent, purporting he had not descended to Santa Fe in 8 months. 8 months of trapping bobcat and wolf, of shooting elk and bear, of existing in the kind of solitude that either breaks a man or forges him into something harder than the granite peaks themselves. Jacob had been broken 4 years earlier. What remained was simply what the mountains had made of the pieces. On that November day, he came down because necessity demanded it. His supplies had run low. Salt for preserving meat. Coffee because a man could survive without many things but not without that bitter black medicine. Ammunition because the Sharps rifle he carried was worthless without the 50 caliber rounds it consumed. And various small items that meant the difference between making it through winter and being found in spring as just another frozen corpse that the mountain had claimed. He led a pack mule loaded with pelts, 12 bobcat skins, each one taken with a single shot in the gray hours before dawn, 3 wolf pelts, thick winter coats that would bring premium prices, and 1 black bear hide, massive and heavy, from an old boar that had made the mistake of investigating Jacob's cabin in October. The mathematics were simple. Bobcat brought $2 each. Wolves fetched 5. The bear hide would command 12 if he could find the right buyer. $51 total. Subtract supplies, he would have perhaps $8 profit. Enough to buy 6 more months of isolation. He wore buckskin trousers blackened with smoke and animal fat, a heavy wool shirt that had once been Army issue, and a coat made from buffalo hide that had seen him through 4 winters. His beard hung thick and untrimmed, more brown than gray at 38, but already showing strands of white at the temples. His hair fell to his shoulders, held back with a strip of leather. The scar that ran from his left ear down his neck, a gift from a Confederate saber at Chancellorsville, showed white against his sun-darkened skin. The Sharps rifle rode across his shoulders, 45 inches of walnut and steel, capable of dropping an elk at 500 yards if the wind was right. At his hip hung a bowie knife with a 12-inch blade he had forged himself from an old wagon spring. And in his belt, though hidden beneath the buffalo coat, rode a Colt Army revolver that he had carried since the war. He smelled of wood smoke and leather, of pine resin in the wild places. Men in Santa Fe gave him space not because they feared him, though many did, but because he carried the scent of something they had lost or never possessed. Freedom. The kind that comes from owing nothing to anyone and expecting nothing in return. Mortensen's trading post stood on the corner of the plaza, its rough wooden walls weathered gray by sun and snow. Jacob had done business there for 5 years. Mortensen was Norwegian, honest in his way, and didn't ask questions. He paid fair prices and kept his mouth shut. That was all Jacob required. But as he approached the post, leading his mule, he heard something that made him stop. Voices, many voices, the kind of crowd that gathered for entertainment, usually at someone else's expense. Jacob's first instinct was to turn away. Crowds meant trouble. Trouble meant questions. Questions meant complications. And complications were exactly what he had fled to the mountains to avoid. But something made him pause. Perhaps it was the tone of the voices, the ugly sound of men amusing themselves with cruelty. Perhaps it was simply that he had been alone too long, and some forgotten part of his humanity responded to the sounds of suffering. Whatever the reason, instead of turning away, he tied his mule to a post and walked toward the commotion. The crowd had gathered in front of the trading post, 60 or 70 men forming a loose circle, miners still wearing their dust, cowboys in from the range, a few soldiers from the fort, several women of the kind who made their living in saloons, all pressed together, their attention focused on something at the center. Jacob moved to the edge of the crowd. At 6'2" and carrying himself like a man who knew how to use the rifle on his shoulder, people moved aside without him having to ask. What he saw stopped him cold. A woman knelt in the mud at the center of the circle. Her hands were bound behind her back with hemp rope, the kind sailors used, thick and rough. But that was not what held Jacob's attention. Over her head, tied at the neck, was a burlap sack. It completely covered her face, leaving her identity a mystery. Standing beside her, playing to the crowd like an actor on a stage, was a man Jacob recognized. Rattlesnake Jim Dooley, a human coyote who made his living in the spaces where law and decency could not reach. Jacob had seen him once before, 3 years earlier, selling a Navajo child to a miner. The child had died within 2 months. No one had cared. No one had asked questions. "Step right up, you worthless degenerates," Rattlesnake Jim shouted, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of a carnival barker. "Feast your eyes on genuine Apache flesh. Young, strong, probably killed a few white men before we caught her." The word Apache rippled through the crowd. Apache. In 1876, that word carried weight. The Apache Wars had been raging for decades. Geronimo was still free, still fighting. Apache meant danger. Apache meant savage. Apache meant enemy. "Do I hear $10?" Jim continued. $10 for a strong woman who can cook, clean, warm your bed on cold nights." The crowd murmured, but no one raised a hand. $10 was serious money. More than that, buying an Apache woman was asking for trouble. What if her tribe came looking? What if the army found out? What if she turned on her new owner in the night with a knife? $5, Jim's voice took on a desperate edge. "Come on, boys, $5. That's less than a weekend drunk." Still no takers. Jacob watched the woman. Even through the burlap sack, even with her hands bound, she held herself differently than he expected. She was not pleading, not crying, not begging. She knelt straight-backed, her breathing steady and visible in the cold air. There was dignity in her silence, pride, even in degradation. Something about that posture reminded Jacob of someone, of a woman he had loved. A woman who had refused to beg even when dying of consumption in a government reservation, denied medicine because the Indian agent deemed it a waste of resources on a woman who was going to die anyway. $3, Jim was shouting now, his showmanship cracking. $3 for a whole woman. I got places to be, boys. Help me out here. $2, then $1. The price kept falling as the entertainment value wore thin and the crowd began to drift away. A woman who might be diseased or scarred, an Apache who might bring a war party down on whoever bought her. It was not worth the risk at any price. Jacob stood at the edge of the dispersing crowd watching. He told himself it was not his business. He had learned that lesson hard. The world was cruel. People suffered. He could not save everyone. He could not even save the one person he had loved most. What was one more stranger in a world full of pain? But then Jim, frustrated and angry, kicked mud at the kneeling woman. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to humiliate. And the woman even then did not cry out, did not flinch, simply took the abuse in silence. Jacob's hand moved to his pocket before his mind caught up with the decision. His fingers found the Morgan silver dollar he kept separate from his other coins. This particular dollar was his stake, his emergency reserve. The coin he would use if everything else failed and he needed a final desperate purchase to survive. His voice, unused for weeks, came out rough and deep. $1. The remaining crowd turned. They recognized him. Wolf McCall, the hermit of Devil's Spine, the man who lived where even the Apache rarely ventured. A hunter, a killer, a ghost. Jim's eyes lit up with greedy triumph. Well, well, Wolf McCall down from his cave. You want her, Wolf? $1 for a whole woman? That is robbery, my friend. Jacob stepped forward, the crowd parting before him like water before a stone. He pulled the silver dollar from his pocket and held it up, letting it catch the afternoon sun. She is hooded, Jacob said, his voice carrying despite its quietness. You claim she is ugly. No one else is buying. Take it or leave it. Either way, she freezes to death on that post tonight if she stays here. Jim snatched at the coin, but Jacob pulled it back. Cut her loose first. How do I know you will pay? Because I said I would. There was something in Jacob's voice, something in his eyes, that made Jim decide not to argue. He pulled a knife and cut the rope binding the woman to the hitching post, but he left her hands tied. Jacob flipped the coin. It spun through the air, flashing silver, and Jim caught it with the practiced ease of a man who had handled many coins. He bit it, checking its authenticity, then grinned. Sold to the hermit of Sangre de Cristo. Do not say I did not warn you about the face, Wolf. Whatever is under that sack ain't pretty. The crowd laughed and dispersed, moving on to the next entertainment. Jim pocketed the dollar and disappeared into the trading post, probably heading for the bar. Jacob and the hooded woman were left alone in the muddy street. He pulled his Bowie knife and the woman flinched, her body tensing for a blow that did not come. Instead, Jacob cut the rope binding her wrists. The hemp had cut deep and blood welled from the raw wounds. She had been tied that way for hours, perhaps days. Can you walk? Jacob asked. The woman nodded once, a jerky movement visible through the burlap. Then walk. We have a long climb before sunset. He did not remove the sack, not here with eyes watching from windows and doorways. Whatever was beneath it, whatever reason Jim had for covering her face, that revelation could wait for privacy. Jacob returned to his mule, untied it, and started walking toward the mountains. Behind him, after a moment's hesitation, he heard footsteps. The woman followed, 5 paces back, a faceless ghost in his wake. The journey from Santa Fe to Jacob's cabin was 18 miles as the crow flew, but closer to 22 following the trails that wound through the foothills and up into the high country. At 3 in the afternoon in November, they had perhaps 2.5 hours of daylight. After that, they would be climbing in darkness. The first miles crossed desert scrubland, creosote bushes, and cholla cactus spreading across rust-red earth. The temperature hovered around 45 degrees, but Jacob knew that up at the cabin, at 9,000 feet elevation, it would be 20 degrees colder. He did not look back to see if the woman followed. He simply walked at his normal pace, steady and ground-eating, the pace of a man accustomed to covering distances on foot. If she fell behind, that was her choice. If she kept up, that told him something about her strength. The woman kept up. Mile 4, as they climbed into the juniper and pinyon pine forest, Jacob heard a sound behind him. A rattle. He stopped and turned, hand moving toward his knife. A rattlesnake lay coiled in the middle of the trail, 6 feet behind the woman. It was late in the season for rattlers to be out, but the afternoon sun had warmed the rocks enough to draw it from its den. Jacob started to warn her to back away slowly, but before he could speak, the woman spoke first. Her voice came muffled through the burlap, but the words were clear, clear and in perfect Apache. Shidai, she said. Stand still. Bull snake only, not deadly. Jacob froze, not because of the snake, which he now was indeed a bull snake, harmless despite its threatening posture. He froze because she had spoken in Apache, and more because she had identified the snake by sound alone. The slight difference in the rattle. Knowledge that came from a lifetime of living where such distinctions meant survival. The snake, realizing it faced no threat, uncoiled and slithered off into the rocks. You speak Apache, Jacob said. I speak many things, the woman replied, still in that language. Will you release me? Not yet, not until we are safe. Safe from what? From whoever sold you, from whoever might come looking. She said nothing more, but resumed walking. Jacob noticed now how she moved, not stumbling, not hesitant. She placed each foot with care, avoiding loose stones, stepping over roots without needing to see them. She knew trails, she knew wilderness. Whatever else she was not some pampered woman used to town living. Mile 8, they reached a small spring where water trickled from between rocks. Jacob stopped and pulled his water skin from his pack. He drank, then held it out to the woman without a word. She took it, lifted the bottom edge of the burlap sack just enough to expose her mouth, and drank. Jacob saw skin the color of desert sandstone, a glimpse of lips cracked from thirst. Then the sack dropped back into place. Why did you buy me? She asked, handing back the water skin. Because I hate men who sell human beings. But you bought me, are you not the same? Jacob considered this. Maybe, but I bought you to spite him, not to own you. What is the difference? I have not decided yet. They walked on in silence. The sun dropped toward the western peaks, painting them in shades of gold and crimson. The temperature began to fall. Jacob's breath became visible in the air. Behind him, he heard the woman's breathing quicken as the altitude increased and the trail steepened. Mile 15, snow began to fall. Light at first, just scattered flakes drifting down through the pines. But Jacob knew the signs. By nightfall, this would be a serious snowfall. They needed to reach the cabin soon. The woman was shivering now. Jacob could see it in the way she hunched her shoulders, trying to preserve heat. He stopped and removed his second coat, the wool army jacket he wore under the buffalo hide. He turned and held it out. She hesitated, then took it. The jacket was far too large for her, swallowing her small frame. But it was warm, and that was all that mattered. Arigo, she said in Apache. Thank you. Jacob nodded and continued climbing. The last 2 miles were the hardest. The trail grew steeper, winding up through a narrow canyon where the wind funneled and intensified. Snow fell thick now, heavy wet flakes that clung to clothes and made the rocks slippery. Jacob moved more carefully, his mule picking its way through stones. Behind him, the woman never complained, never asked to rest. She simply kept climbing, one foot after another, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but her pace never slowing. Finally, as true darkness fell, and the stars began to appear in the gaps between clouds, they crested the final ridge. Jacob's cabin sat before them, a dark shape against the cliff face, smoke from the chimney long since dispersed. The cabin was simple, 20 feet by 15, built from ponderosa pine logs, each a foot thick. Jacob had cut every log himself, dragged them to this spot, notched them, and fitted them together in the summer and fall of 1872. The roof was covered in cedar shakes he had split by hand. The door was thick oak, salvaged from an abandoned freight wagon. The single window on the south wall was real glass, one of his few concessions to comfort. He kicked the door open and ushered the woman inside. The cabin was dark and cold, smelling of pine resin and cured leather, and the indefinable scent of a place long inhabited by a solitary man. Jacob moved with practiced efficiency. He struck a match to light the kerosene lamp that hung from a beam. Yellow light filled the room, revealing the Spartan interior. A single bed built into the wall, covered with bear and elk hides. A heavy table made from split logs. 2 chairs carved from solid pieces of pine. A stone fireplace that dominated the north wall, its chimney rising up through the roof. Shelves holding supplies. A gun rack with 3 rifles and a shotgun. Bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. He knelt at the fireplace and began building a fire. Kindling first, pine needles and small twigs, then progressively larger pieces until flames crackled and heat began to radiate into the cold air. He fed larger logs into the fire, pine and oak mixed for sustained heat. Only then did he turn his attention to his guest. She stood by the door, still wearing the hooded sack, the oversized coat hanging from her shoulders. She had not moved since entering, as if waiting for permission. "Sit," Jacob said, pointing to one of the chairs near the fire. "Warm yourself." The woman moved to the chair and sat, her movements stiff from the cold climb. Jacob filled a tin cup with water from a bucket and held it out to her. She took it, lifted it under the sack to drink. Her hands were shaking badly, making the water slosh. Jacob watched her in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke. "All right, time to take that thing off your head. We are alone here. No one comes to Devil's Spine unless they want to die. You are safe." The woman went very still. Then slowly she shook her head. "No, I will not hurt you," Jacob said. "But I will not have a guest I cannot look in the eye. Take it off." Again she shook her head, more vigorously this time. Her hands came up, clutching the sack as if it were armor. "Rattlesnake Jim said you were ugly," Jacob said, his voice softening slightly. "I have skinned bears and fought wolves. I do not care what you look like. But you cannot eat or breathe properly in that sack." Still she refused. Jacob sighed. "I am going to cut it off. Hold still." A whimper came from beneath the burlap, the first sound of weakness she had made. But she did not run. She seemed resigned, or perhaps simply too exhausted to resist. Jacob pulled his knife and moved behind her. He could see her pulse hammering in her throat where the drawstring cinched the sack. With one quick motion, he sliced the string. Then he gripped the top of the burlap and lifted. The fabric came away. Jacob had braced himself for scarring, for disease, for deformity, for whatever horror would drive a man to keep a human face hidden. What he saw made him drop the sack. The woman was beautiful, not in the soft, pampered way of town women, not in the painted way of saloon girls, but with a stark, fierce beauty that took his breath away. Her hair fell to her waist, black as obsidian, catching the firelight like dark water. Her face was oval, with high cheekbones and a straight nose that spoke of generations of Apache blood. Her skin was the color of honey darkened by desert sun. Her eyes, when they finally lifted to meet his, were black and deep as mountain lakes at midnight. There were marks of violence, a bruise yellowing along her jaw, dried blood at the corner of her mouth, a cut on her forehead. But these injuries only emphasized the underlying structure, the beauty that no amount of suffering could erase. She looked at him, those black eyes filled with fear and defiance in equal measure, waiting for his reaction. Jacob realized he was staring. He took a step back and picked up the discarded burlap sack, needing something to do with his hands. "He said you were ugly," Jacob said quietly. "He lied." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Or he wanted no one to buy me, so I could be humiliated longer, suffer more." "Why would he want that?" "Because I know what they fear." Jacob pulled the other chair around and sat down facing her, keeping enough distance to not seem threatening. "What do they fear?" The woman studied him for a long moment. Then, as if coming to some internal decision, she spoke. "My name is Kimamela Morning Star. I am the daughter of Samuel Delshay, medicine man of the Warm Springs Apache. 4 months ago, Thomas William Crane, the Indian agent, sent men to attack our village at dawn. They killed 8 people, including my father." Her voice was steady, but her hands clenched into fists on her lap. Jacob remained silent, letting her speak. "Crane shot my father in the back while he was kneeling in prayer. He was unarmed, 76 years old. Crane shot him like a dog. Why? Because my father discovered something. A secret worth $2 million in silver. A secret that proves Crane is stealing land that belongs to my people under the Treaty of 1872. Jacob leaned forward slightly. "What kind of secret?" Kimamela met his eyes. "A map, carved in stone 1,000 years ago by our ancestors. It shows the boundaries of Apache land and the location of a silver mine, a mine that Crane claims is on government land, but the stone map proves it belongs to my people." "Where is this map?" "In Sacred Canyon, 5 days' walk southeast of here, hidden in a way that only my father and I knew how to find. Crane tortured me for 2 weeks, trying to make me tell him. I did not speak, so he sold me to Rattlesnake Jim, to break my spirit, to make me wish for death. Jacob absorbed this. If Crane knows you are still alive and free, he will kill you, Kimamela finished, and anyone you care about, if you have anyone left to care about. Jacob looked into the fire. I do not. My wife died 4 years ago. Nasha was her name. Mescalero Apache. She died of consumption on a government reservation because the Indian agent refused to waste medicine on an Indian woman. He turned back to Kimimela. So your threat does not frighten me. I stopped being afraid of death when I buried her. Yeah, Kimimela stared at him. You married Apache? In an Apache ceremony in 1868. We had 4 years together before they moved her tribe to the reservation. The government did not recognize our marriage, said an Indian could not legally marry a white man. So when she died, I had no rights. No say in her burial, nothing. So you came to the mountains. So I came to the mountains, because here the rules are simple. Be strong enough to survive or die. No lies, no politics, no corrupt officials deciding who lives and who dies based on the color of their skin. Kimamela reached out slowly and placed her hand over his. Her palm was small and rough with calluses. I thought all white men were like Crane, but you are different. I am not a good man, Jacob said. I am just tired of the world's evil. They sat in silence, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Then Kimamela spoke again. Thank you for buying me, for $1 silver. I know it was all you had. Jacob looked at her sharply. How did you know that? I felt your hesitation before you spoke. I heard the weight of the decision in your voice. That coin meant something to you, yet you spent it on a hooded stranger. It seemed important at the time. It was. She squeezed his hand. More important than you know. The night grew deeper. Jacob prepared a simple meal of elk jerky and pine nut cakes. They ate in silence, both exhausted from the day's events. When the meal was done, Kimimela stood. I will not sleep inside, she said. Jacob frowned. Why not? It is 20 degrees outside. You will freeze. Apache believed that sleeping in an enclosed space traps the soul. The soul needs to see the sky, to see the stars, to know the way back to the ancestors. She looked around the cabin. This place is like a cage to me. Jacob was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and opened the door, gesturing to the wide porch that extended along the south side of the cabin. My wife said the same thing. I built this porch for her. The roof keeps off rain and snow, but there are no walls. She slept here for 3 years. Kimamela looked at the porch, then back at him. Her eyes had gone soft. You loved her very much. Every day, but love does not stop when someone dies. It just changes shape. He brought out bedding, heavy buffalo robes, and wool blankets. He built a small fire in an iron brazier that he placed at the edge of the porch, enough to provide heat without creating smoke that would choke them. They sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the snow fall beyond the roof's edge. The stars appeared in breaks between the clouds, impossibly bright at this elevation. Tell me about your father, Jacob said. Kimamela's voice took on a different quality when she spoke of Delche. Pride mixed with grief, love mixed with anger. He was born in 1820, 76 years old when he died, but still strong as a warrior of 40. He spoke 4 languages: Apache, Spanish, English, and Navajo. He learned English from missionaries, not because he believed their religion, but because he said to defeat an enemy, you must understand their words. Words open the door to the mind. She pulled the blanket tighter. He taught me to read and write English when I was 6 years old. By the time I was 10, I could read your Declaration of Independence. Father said, learn their law, because they will use law to steal our land. You must know the law to fight back. He was a wise man. Yes, that is why Crane feared him. Father discovered the sacred canyon map 3 years ago. He was gathering herbs in a canyon we had used for ceremonies for generations. He noticed something strange about the rock wall, markings that only appeared when the sun hit at a certain angle. Kimamela's eyes grew distant, remembering. He spent months studying it. The map was carved by our ancestors 1,000 years ago. It shows the exact boundaries of Apache land and marks the location of a sacred silver mine. According to the Treaty of 1872, we keep our ancestral lands if we can provide historical evidence. The stone map is that evidence. Yes, it proves Silver Canyon is ours, but Crane has claimed it for a mining company, a company that will make him rich if he can erase our claim. So he must destroy the map, or at least make sure no one can find it. But only you and your father knew where it was. Kimamela nodded. The map is hidden. It only appears when two things happen together. First, the sun must shine at exactly the right angle. This happens once a year, at sunrise on the winter solstice. Second, there must be sound, a specific pattern of sound, a sacred song that makes the rock vibrate at the right frequency to reveal the hidden markings. Jacob turned this over in his mind. So even if Crane finds the right canyon, without knowing the song and the exact day, he will never see the map. Correct. Father taught me the song, made me memorize it. He said, if anything happens to me, you must be the keeper of this knowledge. You must protect our people's claim. And Crane knows this. Yes, that is why he kept me alive after killing Father. He needed me to reveal the location and the method. But I would not speak. Not even when she trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to her ribs where bruises still showed through her dress. Jacob felt a cold anger building in his chest, the same anger he had felt watching his wife die, unable to help her, unable to stop the cascade of bureaucratic cruelty that had led to her death. We will get that map, he said, and we will use it to destroy Crane. Kimimela looked at him, You do not have to do this. You bought me for $1. That does not make you responsible for my war. Maybe not, but it makes it my choice to help, and I choose to help. Why? Jacob was silent for a long moment, watching the snow fall. Because 4 years ago I was helpless. I could not save the person I loved most. I could not fight the system that killed her. I could only watch and bury her and walk away. He turned to meet her eyes. I will not walk away this time. I will not be helpless this time. This time I will fight. Kimimela reached out and took his hand again. They sat like that, two damaged souls finding unexpected strength in each other, while the winter night deepened around them. But their peace did not last long. It was Kimimela who heard it first. She went rigid, her head turning slightly, listening to something Jacob could not yet perceive. What? He whispered. Men, coming up the trail. 6, maybe 7. How can you tell? The birds stopped singing, the wind carries the smell of tobacco smoke, and I hear, she tilted her head, horses, being led on foot to keep quiet. They are trying to surprise us. Jacob's mind raced. It had been less than 8 hours since he bought Kimimela in Santa Fe, but apparently that was long enough for word to reach the wrong people. Crane must have watchers in town, must have sent riders the moment he learned an Apache woman had been purchased and taken into the mountains. How long until they reach us? He asked, already moving into the cabin to gather weapons. 20 minutes, maybe less. Jacob loaded the Sharps rifle and both pistols. He grabbed extra ammunition and his powder horn. As he worked, he explained his plan. The cabin has a root cellar beneath that trap door. He pointed to a section of floor covered by a bearskin rug. The cellar connects to a tunnel I dug 3 years ago. It comes out 200 yards downhill, behind a rock outcrop near the waterfall. Why did you dig a tunnel? Bears. Sometimes they try to break in during winter. I wanted an escape route. He handed her one of the pistols. Can you shoot? I have never held a gun. Then you learn now. This is the hammer. Pull it back with your thumb. That makes it ready to fire. Aim center of body, not the head. Squeeze the trigger slowly. The gun will kick upward, so hold tight. Kimimela took the pistol gingerly, feeling its weight. From outside came a sound, a voice carrying up through the trees, loud enough to be heard but trying to sound friendly. McCall, Jacob McCall, this is Pike Jacobson. We need to talk. Jacob recognized the name. Pike Jacobson was Crane's enforcer, a former cavalry sergeant cashiered out for excessive brutality during the Apache campaigns. A man who enjoyed violence the way some men enjoyed whiskey. Jacob moved to the window and peered out carefully. He could see shapes moving between the trees, dark forms positioning themselves. This was not a negotiation. This was a siege. "We know you have the Apache woman," Pike shouted. "Mr. Crane wants her back. Send her out and you can keep the dollar. Hell, we will give you 100 in gold. Just send her out." Jacob looked at Kimimela. She had gone pale, but her jaw was set with determination. "Your choice," he said quietly. $100 in gold is a lot of money for a mountain man." Kimimela's response was to cock the hammer on the pistol, the metallic click loud in the quiet cabin. "If you send me out, I will shoot you first, then save the last bullet for myself." Jacob smiled, a rare expression that made him look younger. "Good answer." He turned back to the window and shouted, "Pike, you are trespassing. Turn around and leave, or I will bury you on this mountain." The answer was a volley of gunfire. Bullets slammed into the log walls, thudding deep into the wood. The window shattered, glass exploding inward. Jacob and Kimimela dropped to the floor as lead filled the air above them. The siege had begun, and with it, the true test of whether one silver dollar could buy not just a woman's freedom, but justice itself. The night was young, and blood was about to be spilled on the winter snow of Devil's Spine. The gunfire lasted 30 seconds. Though to Jacob and Kimimela pressed flat against the cabin floor, it felt like 30 minutes. Bullets chewed into the pine logs, some punching through where previous shots had weakened the wood. Splinters rained down like wooden rain. The single kerosene lamp exploded in a spray of glass and burning oil, starting small fires on the floor that Jacob quickly smothered with a blanket. Then silence, deeper and more threatening than the violence that had preceded it. Jacob crawled to the wall beside the shattered window and rose slowly, keeping below the sight line. He peered out through the broken glass. In the moonlight reflecting off fresh snow, he could see dark shapes positioned behind trees. 6 men, just as Kimimela had predicted. Maybe a 7th watching from higher ground. "McCall!" Pike's voice carried clearly through the winter air. "That was a warning. Next time we aim to kill, be reasonable. The woman is Apache. She killed innocent white folks. She belongs to Mr. Crane, legal-like. You are harboring a fugitive." Jacob did not waste breath responding. Words would not change what was about to happen. He moved back to where Kimimela crouched against the wall, the pistol gripped in both hands, her knuckles white. "They will try to burn us out," Jacob said quietly. "They cannot risk a prolonged firefight. They do not know this terrain like I do, and they do not want to still be here at dawn when they lose the advantage of numbers. So what do? We leave, through the tunnel, but first, we make them think we are staying to fight." Jacob moved to the gun rack and selected his Sharps rifle. He loaded it carefully, measuring the powder charge with practiced precision. 50 grains of black powder behind a heavy lead slug, enough power to punch through a tree trunk at 300 yards. He positioned himself at the corner of the window with the best angle on the positions outside. He took his time, letting his breathing slow, letting his heart rate settle. This was not the first time he had been in a fight for his life. The war had taught him patience. The mountains had reinforced the lesson. When he fired, the Sharps roared like thunder contained. The muzzle flashed bright enough to temporarily blind. "Downrange," a man screamed. Jacob had aimed for the shoulder, not wanting to kill if he could avoid it, but knowing a wounded man would slow down the others. "One down," he said, already reloading. "That buys us 5 minutes while they regroup." As if to confirm his words, the return fire was more cautious now, less concentrated. The attackers had learned that the man in the cabin could shoot. Jacob grabbed the heavy bearskin rug and yanked it aside, revealing the trapdoor beneath. He pulled it open. Below was darkness and the smell of earth. A ladder descended into blackness. "Down," he said to Kimimela. "I will cover the entrance and follow." But she did not move immediately. Instead, she looked around the cabin, at the simple furniture Jacob had built with his own hands, at the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, at the spare but functional space he had made into a home. "You are losing your home because of me," she said. "It is just wood and memories. Memories I will carry regardless. Now go." Kimimela descended the ladder. Jacob took one last look around the cabin. She was right. This place represented 4 years of his life. 4 years of hiding from pain, from the world, from himself. Maybe it was time for it to end. He lit a second lamp and deliberately dropped it onto the pile of furs in the corner. The dry pelts caught immediately, flames spreading fast. Then he descended into the root cellar and pulled the trapdoor closed above him. The cellar was 8 feet deep, 10 feet square, carved from the rocky soil beneath the cabin. Shelves held preserved foods in jars, sacks of dried beans and corn, barrels of salt pork. In the far corner, another opening led to the tunnel. Kimimela stood waiting, her face barely visible in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the floorboards above. Already they could hear the crackle of flames spreading through the cabin overhead. "The tunnel is 60 feet long," Jacob said, picking up a second lamp he kept in the cellar. "It is narrow. I had to dig it in sections, shoring up the ceiling as I went. In some places you will have to crawl. Stay close behind me." He lit the lamp and entered the tunnel. It was indeed narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders. The ceiling was rough timbers holding back tons of earth. The floor was hard-packed dirt, worn smooth from the few times he had used this escape route during practice runs. They had made it perhaps 30 feet when they heard it. A thud above them, then another. Footsteps on the cabin floor. Pike's men had breached the burning building, probably looking to make sure their targets had not already escaped. Then, distinctly, a voice. "The floor! Look, a trap door!" "Move faster," Jacob said to Kimimela. Behind them they heard the trapdoor being yanked open. A voice echoed down into the cellar. "There! A tunnel! They are in the tunnel!" A gunshot thundered in the confined space. The bullet ricocheted off stone, whining past Jacob's ear, close enough that he felt the heat of its passage. "Go!" he shouted. They ran, bent over, scrambling through sections where the ceiling dropped lower. Behind them the sounds of pursuit. Someone was in the tunnel. Someone smaller than Pike, because Jacob had deliberately made the narrowest sections impassable for a large man. But apparently they had brought someone who could fit. The tunnel took a sharp bend to the left, following the natural contours of the rock beneath the mountain. As Jacob rounded the corner, he glanced back and saw lamplight bobbing behind them, perhaps 40 feet back. Close. Too close. Then the tunnel began to slope downward. Water seeped through the walls here, making the floor slick. The sound of running water grew louder. They were approaching the exit, which opened behind a waterfall that cascaded down from the spring above the cabin. Jacob emerged first, pushing through a screen of ice-crusted bushes he had planted to conceal the opening. The night air hit him like a fist, cold and sharp after the relative warmth of the tunnel. Behind him, Kimimela scrambled out, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They stood on a narrow ledge beside the frozen waterfall, 30 feet above the canyon floor. The path down was treacherous in daylight. In darkness, with ice coating every surface, it was nearly suicidal. From the tunnel came a shout. Their pursuer was close. Jacob made a decision. He pulled the pistol from his belt and fired 2 shots back into the tunnel, not aiming to hit, but to slow pursuit. Then he grabbed Kimimela's hand. "We jump." "Jump? It is 30 feet. Into a snowdrift." "I have done it before. Bend your knees when you land. Roll if you can. Do not think, just do." He did not give her time to argue. He pulled her over the edge. For a moment they were falling through darkness and snow, the ground rushing up. Then impact. The snowdrift was deeper than Jacob had hoped. Perhaps 10 feet of powder accumulated against the cliff face. They plunged through it, the cold shocking the breath from their lungs, the world going white and silent. Jacob fought his way up through the snow, pulling Kimimela with him. They broke the surface, gasping, covered head to toe in white powder. Above them, a figure appeared at the ledge, silhouetted against the burning glow of the cabin. A gunshot cracked, the bullet whipping past Jacob's head. He dragged Kimimela into the cover of the trees as more shots followed, none finding their mark in the darkness and confusion. They ran. The terrain here was all broken rock and dense pine, the ground covered in 2 feet of snow that made every step a battle. But Jacob knew this land. Every boulder, every ravine, every game trail. He had spent 4 years learning it, walking it, hunting it. He moved with confidence, even in darkness, choosing paths that gave cover, that led away from the cabin and the burning beacon it had become. Behind them, shouts echoed through the forest. Pike was coordinating his men, spreading them out to cut off escape routes. But he was working blind, in unfamiliar territory, against an enemy who knew every stone. After 20 minutes of hard running, Jacob called a halt in the dense thicket of junipers. They were both breathing hard, white clouds of vapor hanging in the still air. Jacob listened but heard no immediate sounds of pursuit. "They will wait until dawn," he said quietly. "In darkness, in terrain they do not know, they risk shooting each other or falling off a cliff. Come first light, they will track us." "How far to this sacred canyon?" Kimimela asked. "5 days on foot in good conditions, probably 7 in this snow. And they will follow us the whole way." "Yes, unless we do something about it first." Jacob's mind was already working through options, calculating distances and possibilities. "Your brother Miguel, the one who betrayed you to Crane, do you know where to find him?" Kimimela's face went hard at the mention of her brother. "He has a camp at Coyote Rocks, 2 days southeast of here. Why?" "Because if we are going to reach Sacred Canyon alive, we need help. We need someone who knows the land and can fight. Can your brother be trusted?" "I do not know. He chose Crane over family. But—" She paused, considering. "3 days ago, I received this." She reached into the dress she wore, pulling out a small object tied to a leather cord around her neck. It was half of a butterfly carved from turquoise, broken cleanly down the middle. "My mother gave Miguel and me matching pendants before she died. She said we were two halves of one soul, that we should never break apart." Kimimela's voice was bitter. "Miguel broke his half when he betrayed our father. But 2 days before Crane sold me, someone left this outside my cell wrapped in cloth with a message." "What did the message say?" "Sister, I was wrong. Crane lies. I will help if I can." She looked at Jacob. It was in Miguel's handwriting. Jacob absorbed this. "So maybe he has changed his mind. Or maybe it is a trap." "Yes, both are possible. But without help, Crane will run us down before we reach Sacred Canyon. So we take the risk." They spent what remained of the night sheltered in a small cave Jacob knew, a space barely large enough for 2 people but hidden and out of the wind. They did not dare light a fire. Instead, they huddled together under the buffalo coat and wool blanket, sharing body heat. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of gray, Kimimela spoke softly. "Tell me more about your wife, about Nasha." Jacob was silent for a long moment. He rarely spoke of her. The pain was still too fresh, even after 4 years. But something about Kimimela, about the quiet way she asked, made him want to share. "I met her in '68. I was working as an army scout, tracking Comancheros who were raiding settlements. The trail led into Mescalero territory, and the army wanted a peace talk before we went further. Nasha's father was the chief. She was his translator." His voice took on a distant quality, remembering. "She was 29 years old, had been married before, but her husband died in a raid. No children. In Apache culture, a widow can choose whether to remarry or remain alone. She had chosen to remain alone, focusing on learning medicine from the tribal healers." "What made her change her mind?" "I got shot. Stupid mistake, not watching my back during a skirmish. The bullet went through my side, cracked a rib. Would have died from infection if Nasha had not treated me. She used herbs I had never seen, techniques I did not know. Kept me alive when the army surgeon had given up." Jacob shifted slightly, remembering the pain of that wound, but also the gentle hands that had tended it. "I stayed with the Mescalero for 2 months while I healed. Learned their language, learned their ways. And Nasha and we understood each other. Both of us had seen too much violence. Both of us were tired of war." "So you married?" "In an Apache ceremony, yes, in '68. We had 4 good years, the best years of my life. She taught me everything I know about medicine, about plants, about living with the land instead of against it." His voice roughened. "Then the government decided to consolidate the tribes, move the Mescalero to a new reservation with bad water and worse land. Nasha got sick within 6 months, and they would not help her. The Indian agent was a man named Wilkins. He had medicine, supplies, but he said they were for white settlers, not for Indians. Said treating Nasha would be a waste of resources." Jacob's hands clenched into fists. "I begged. I offered money I did not have. I threatened. Nothing worked. She died in our lodge, coughing blood, while boxes of medicine sat locked in Wilkins' office. Kimimela placed her hand over his. I am sorry. After she died, I could not stay. Could not keep working for a government that let good people die for no reason other than the color of their skin. So I came to the mountains, told myself I would never care about another person again. That way I could never be hurt again. He looked at Kimimela, really looked at her, seeing not just the beautiful woman who had been hidden under a burlap sack, but the strength and intelligence and courage she carried. But I am starting to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe running away from pain also means running away from any chance of joy. Kimimela met his eyes. My father used to say that mountains teach us to stand alone, but valleys teach us to stand together. Maybe you have been in the mountains long enough. Before Jacob could respond, a sound from outside the cave made them both freeze. Footsteps in snow, multiple sets, coming from uphill. Pike's men. They had picked up the trail. Jacob put a finger to his lips, then slowly reached for his rifle. The footsteps passed within 20 feet of the cave entrance, but the thick screen of brush Jacob had positioned years ago did its job. The men moved on, talking in low voices about lost tracks and the difficulty of the terrain. When the sounds faded, Jacob and Kimimela emerged from the cave. The sun was fully up now, bright on the snow. Their own tracks from the night before were clearly visible, leading to the cave, but the fresh snowfall had partially filled them in. By tomorrow, they would be gone completely. We go east, Jacob said, away from Coyote Rocks initially to throw them off. Then we circle back. It will add a day to the journey, but better slow than dead. They traveled hard for 2 days, moving through country that grew progressively more rugged. The mountains here were raw stone and scraggly pine, broken by deep canyons where winter wind howled like tortured spirits. They saw Pike's men twice more, always at a distance, always searching but never quite finding. On the afternoon of the second day, they approached Coyote Rocks. The formation was distinctive, a cluster of red sandstone pillars weathered by wind into shapes that resembled coyotes frozen mid-howl. It was a sacred place to many tribes, considered neutral ground where even enemies could meet to talk. Miguel's camp is in the canyon just beyond, Kimimela said, but we should not approach directly. He may not be alone. Agreed, we watch first, see who comes and goes. They spent 2 hours observing from a high point that gave a view of the canyon entrance. In that time, they saw 3 Apache men come and go, all warriors by the way they moved. No sign of white men, no sign of Crane's influence. As the sun began to set, painting the rocks in shades of blood and fire, Kimimela made a decision. I will go, lone. If it is a trap, no reason for both of us to walk into it. No, Jacob said firmly. We go together. We started this together. We see it through together. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Together. They descended as darkness fell, moving carefully through shadows that deepened between the rocks. The camp was small, just 3 wickiups arranged around a central fire. Horses grazed on sparse grass nearby. The smell of cooking meat carried on the cold air. As they approached, a figure emerged from the largest wickiup, a man, tall and lean, dressed in a mixture of Apache and white man's clothing. Buckskin leggings, a wool shirt, a cavalry vest likely taken from a dead soldier. His face was hard-edged and scarred, with a nose that had been broken and healed crooked. Miguel Santana stopped when he saw them, his hand moving automatically to the knife at his belt. Then recognition dawned. Kimimela, he said in Apache, his voice carrying shock and something that might have been relief. You are alive. No thanks to you, traitor, Kimimela replied, her voice cold as the winter wind. Miguel flinched as if struck. I deserve that, and worse. But please, sister, let me explain. Explain how you led Crane to father. Explain how you told him where to attack. Explain how 8 people died because of you. I thought, Miguel's voice broke. I thought if I cooperated, Crane would spare our people. He promised. He said if we showed we could be peaceful, could be civilized, they would let us keep our land. And you believed him? Kimimela's voice rose. You believed the lies of a white man who steals from his own people? I was a fool. Miguel spread his hands. I know that now. Crane used me. After he got what he wanted, he tried to have me killed. Look. He lifted his shirt, showing a bandage wrapped around his ribs. When he peeled it back, they could see a healing bullet wound. 3 days ago, Pike shot me when I refused to lead them to Sacred Canyon. Said Crane had no more use for a tame Apache. I barely escaped. Jacob had remained silent, watching, assessing. Now he spoke. Why should we trust you? You betrayed your family once. What stops you from doing it again? Miguel reached into his shirt and pulled out a broken piece of turquoise on a leather cord, the other half of the butterfly. He held it up beside the piece Kimimela wore. Mother said we were two halves of one soul. I broke mine when I betrayed you. I want to make it whole again. He looked at his sister with naked pain in his eyes. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot bring back father or the others. But I can help you now. I can fight beside you. Let me try to earn back even a fraction of what I threw away. Kimimela stared at her brother, her expression unreadable. Jacob could see the war inside her, between love and betrayal, between hope and suspicion. Finally she spoke. If you betray us again, I will kill you myself. Not quickly, not cleanly. I will make it last. Miguel nodded. I would expect nothing less. Then tell us what you know. What is Crane planning? Miguel gestured for them to sit by the fire. As they settled onto woven mats, he began to speak. Crane is not just stealing land. He is planning genocide. He has orders from the territorial governor, a man named Morrison who also has shares in the Silver Baron Mining Company. The orders authorize a military action against the Warm Springs Apache. They call it an uprising suppression, but it is a massacre waiting to happen. When? Jacob asked. 22 days from now, December 15th. The cavalry will attack the reservation at dawn. They will claim the Apache fired first. Then they will kill everyone. Bow. Men, women, children. 400 people. Kimimela's face went white. 400? After the massacre, Crane and Morrison will claim the land belonged to the government all along, that the Apache had no legitimate claim. They will open the silver mine and become rich beyond imagining. Unless we can prove the land belongs to the Apache, Jacob said, with the Sacred Canyon map. Yes, but the map alone is not enough. We also need Crane's documents, the false reports he has filed, the forged orders, the evidence of the conspiracy between him and Morrison. Miguel leaned forward. I know where he keeps them, in his safe at the Warm Springs Agency office. I saw them when I worked for him. Can we get to them? Kimimela asked. The office is guarded, 20 men during the day, 8 at night, but I know the building. I helped Crane plan its defenses. Miguel's eyes glinted in the firelight. I know how to get in. Jacob considered this. The mathematics of survival were shifting. With Miguel's knowledge, they had a chance. Without it, they would likely die before ever reaching Sacred Canyon. All right, he said, here's what we do. We hit the Warm Springs Agency office first. Steal Crane's documents. That will draw his attention and his men away from Sacred Canyon. While they are chasing us, we slip past to the canyon, get the map, and then race for Fort Stanton. Fort Stanton? Miguel asked. Colonel Benjamin Hatch commands there. He has a reputation for honesty. If we can get the evidence to him, he has the authority to countermand the governor's orders and stop the massacre. That is a lot of ifs, Miguel said. Then, yes, Jacob agreed, but unless you have a better plan, it is what we have. They spent that night planning, Miguel drawing maps in the dirt showing the layout of the Warm Springs Agency office, the guard rotations, the location of Crane's safe. Jacob contributed his knowledge of tactics and strategy, while Kimimela pointed out weaknesses and opportunities that the men had missed. By dawn, they had a plan. Dangerous, barely possible, but a plan nonetheless. They would strike in 3 nights' time, giving them time to rest and prepare. Miguel would create a distraction on the west side of the building, using fire arrows to panic the horses and draw guards away. Jacob and Kimimela would infiltrate from the east, through a root cellar that connected to the main building. One problem, Miguel said as they finalized details. The safe, can you open it? Jacob shook his head. I am no safecracker. I am, Kimimela said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. Father taught me. He said the white man's locks are like puzzles. If you understand how they think, you can open anything. Can you open a Morrison 12-gauge safe? Miguel asked. That is what Crane has. They are supposed to be impregnable. Kimmy Mella smiled, a sharp expression that had nothing to do with humor. Let me worry about the safe. You worry about keeping the guards busy. 3 nights later, under a waning moon, 3 figures moved through the darkness toward the Warm Springs Agency compound. They came from different directions, converging on the 2-story wooden building that served as the administrative center for Indian agent Thomas William Crane. Miguel approached from the west, carrying a bundle of oil-soaked arrows. At precisely 2 in the morning, he loosed the first one, the flaming shaft arcing through the darkness to embed in the hay storage near the stables. The effect was immediate. Horses screamed as the fire spread, the dry hay exploding into flame. Guards came running from all directions, shouting, trying to control the panicking animals. While chaos erupted on the west side, Jacob and Kimmy Mella moved in from the east. They found the root cellar door exactly where Miguel had described it, hidden behind a stack of empty barrels. The lock was simple, and Kimmy Mella had it open in less than a minute. They descended into darkness, Jacob holding a small lamp that gave just enough light to see by. The cellar was exactly as Miguel had described. 10 feet square, dirt floor, shelves holding preserved foods. And in the far wall, a wooden door that led to the tunnel connecting to the main building. The tunnel was narrow and smelled of damp earth and rats. They crawled through it, Jacob in the lead with his knife ready. At the far end, another door, this one with a simple bolt that slid back easily. They emerged into the main building's basement, among boxes of supplies and filing cabinets. Above them, they could hear footsteps, shouts, the confusion of the fire continuing outside. Jacob led the way up the stairs, moving slowly, listening for any sound of guards. The building seemed empty, everyone having rushed outside to deal with the emergency. Crane's office was on the second floor, northwest corner, just as Miguel had said. The door was locked but not bolted. Jacob used his knife to work the simple mechanism, and it clicked open. The office was lavish compared to the rest of the building. A large desk of polished oak, leather chairs, a Turkish rug on the floor. And on the wall behind the desk, a portrait of President Grant hung slightly crooked. Kimmy Mella went straight to the portrait and lifted it off the wall, revealing the safe beneath. It was indeed a Morrison 12-gauge, a heavy iron box with a combination lock that was supposed to be unbreakable. While Kimmy Mella worked on the safe, Jacob kept watch at the door. Minutes ticked by. Outside, the shouting seemed to be dying down. The fire was probably under control. Soon guards would return to their posts. How much longer? He whispered. Patience, Kimmy Mella replied, her ear pressed against the safe door, her fingers delicately working the dial. Each lock has its own voice. I am learning to hear this one. Click. The first tumbler fell, then another, and another. The safe door swung open. Inside was exactly what Miguel had promised. Stacks of documents, telegrams, forged reports claiming Apache uprisings that had never happened. And, most damning, a leather-bound journal. Kimmy Mella pulled out the journal and opened it. Her hands began to shake as she read Crane's own words, written in his distinctive, cramped handwriting. Jacob, she said, her voice trembling with rage and vindication. Listen to this. November 1876. Sold the Delchay girl today. $1 to some mountain hermit. Rattlesnake will break her, or she will die in some miner's bed. Either way, threat eliminated. My son William is avenged. She flipped pages. The Apache will pay for taking my boy. All of them. Every man, woman, and child. Morrison has promised me 40% of the Silver Canyon profits. $2 million in silver means $800,000 for me. Enough to buy a Senate seat. Enough to make them all pay. Jacob's jaw clenched. Everything was here. The evidence of conspiracy, of fraud, of planned genocide. Planned. All in Crane's own hand. Take it all, he said. Everything in that safe. We will need every piece. Kimmy Mella stuffed documents into a leather satchel she had brought. The journal, the telegrams, everything that could prove Crane's guilt. She had just closed the safe when they heard it. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots, multiple sets. They had run out of time. Jacob positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. How many exits from this office? Just the door, and Kimimella looked around desperately. The window. Second story, 20-foot drop. Better than bullets. The footsteps reached the hallway. A voice called out, "Who is up here? Show yourself." Jacob recognized the voice. Pike Jacobson. Of course, Crane would have left his best enforcer on guard inside the building. The door flew open. Pike stood there, pistol drawn, his face twisting into a snarl when he saw Jacob and Kimimella. "McCall, you son of—" Jacob did not let him finish. He lunged forward, driving his shoulder into Pike's gun hand, forcing the pistol up. The gun went off, the bullet punching harmlessly into the ceiling. They crashed through the doorway and into the hall, two big men grappling for control of the weapon. Jacob was strong from years of mountain living, but Pike had been a soldier, trained in hand-to-hand combat. Pike drove his knee into Jacob's ribs, then brought his elbow down hard on Jacob's shoulder. The blow numbed Jacob's arm, made him lose his grip. Pike twisted free and brought the pistol around. The gunshot was deafening in the confined hallway. But it was not Pike who had fired. It was Kimimella, standing in the office doorway with the pistol Jacob had given her, now smoking in her shaking hands. Pike looked down at his shoulder where blood bloomed across his shirt. He looked back up at Kimimella with disbelief. "You shot me. You actually—" "And I will do it again if you move," Kimimella said, though her voice shook as badly as her hands. Shouts from downstairs. More guards coming. The firefight had given away their position. Jacob grabbed Kimimella's arm and pulled her back into the office. "Window, now!" They ran to the window, and Jacob smashed it open with the rifle butt. Cold air rushed in. Below was darkness and the unknown. But behind was certain death. "Jump!" Jacob shouted and pushed Kimimella through the window. He heard her scream cut off as she landed. Then he was following, the world spinning as he fell, the ground rushing up, impact that drove the breath from his lungs and sent pain lancing through his legs. But he was alive. They were both alive, and they had the documents. Gunfire erupted from the window above. Bullets chewed into the ground around them. Jacob grabbed Kimimella, and they ran, stumbling through darkness, the sounds of pursuit already beginning behind them. Miguel was waiting with 3 horses at the prearranged meeting point. "Did you get it?" he asked as they thundered up. "Everything," Kimimella gasped, clutching the satchel to her chest. "Then ride. They will be right behind us." They mounted and rode into the night, 3 desperate figures racing against death itself, carrying in a leather satchel the evidence that could save 400 lives or condemn them all to graves in the desert sand. The hunt was on, and the prey had just become predators. They rode hard through the night, 3 horses carrying 3 riders whose lives hung by threads as thin as spider silk. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, then faded, then grew loud again as Crane's men tried to pick up the trail in darkness. Jacob led them through country he knew from his years of wandering, choosing paths that followed rocky ground where hoofprints would not show, fording streams to break the scent trail for any dogs they might bring. Kimimella rode in the middle, the leather satchel clutched tight against her body. Miguel brought up the rear, occasionally firing shots backward into the darkness, not aiming to hit, but to slow their pursuers, to make them cautious. By dawn, they had put perhaps 10 miles between themselves and the agency compound. Not enough, not nearly enough. Crane would send everything he had after them now. The documents they carried could destroy him, could hang him for treason and murder. He would not stop until they were dead, or he was. They paused at a spring to water the horses and refill their canteens. The animals were lathered and blowing hard. They could not maintain this pace much longer. "How far to Sacred Canyon?" Jacob asked Miguel. 4 days at normal pace, maybe 6 or 7 if we have to keep running like this." Miguel studied the back trail. "And Crane will send riders ahead. He knows where we are going. He will try to cut us off." "Then we need to get there first," Kimimella said. "The documents are important, but without the stone map, we only have half the evidence. We need both." Jacob nodded slowly. "How many men can Crane field?" 30, maybe 40 if he calls in every man on his payroll, but he cannot send them all after us. He still has to maintain the appearance of normal operations. I would guess he will send 15, maybe 20 hunters, his best trackers and fighters. Against 3 of us. Jacob's voice was grim. Not good odds. "No," Miguel agreed, But we have one advantage. We know this land. Most of Crane's men are hired guns from back east. They know cities and towns. They do not know desert and mountains. That gives us an edge. A thin edge, Kimimela said, but better than none. They rode on through the day, pushing the horses as hard as they dared, but trying to conserve their strength. The landscape changed as they went, pine forest giving way to high desert, the ground becoming more broken, cut by deep arroyos and scattered with red rock formations that rose like ancient monuments. That night, they made a cold camp in a box canyon, no fire to give away their position. They took turns on watch, 2 hours each. When it was Jacob's turn, Kimimela came and sat beside him in the darkness. "Tell me about Sacred Canyon," he said quietly. "What will we find there?" Kimimela pulled her blanket tighter against the cold. "It is a place of great beauty and great power. My people have used it for ceremonies for 1,000 years. The walls are covered with petroglyphs, ancient writing left by those who came before us. Most are simple pictures, animals, hunters, symbols of the sun and moon. But the map is different. Yes, the map is hidden within other images. You can walk through that canyon 100 times and never see it unless you know what to look for and when to look." She paused. Father discovered it by accident. He was gathering healing herbs, working in the canyon just after dawn on the winter solstice. The sun came through a gap in the rocks at exactly the right angle, and suddenly he saw patterns he had never noticed before. Lines and symbols that made no sense until he realized they formed a map. "In the sound, you said there had to be a specific sound to make it fully visible." "Yes." Father experimented for months, trying different things. Finally, he discovered that if you sang the old healing song, the one passed down for generations, the vibrations made dust fall from hidden cracks in the stone. The dust had been deliberately placed there centuries ago, filling grooves carved into the rock. When it falls away, the complete map is revealed. Jacob tried to picture it. An ancient people clever enough to create a hidden message that would survive 1,000 years, waiting for the right eyes and the right knowledge to reveal it. Your ancestors were wise. They knew that secrets kept in one person's mind die when that person dies. But secrets carved in stone can last forever if you know how to read them. Kimimela looked at him. That is why Crane is so dangerous. He does not just want to steal land. He wants to erase the proof that we were ever here. He wants to write us out of history. We will not let him. Jacob's voice carried absolute conviction. I swear to you, we will get that map. We will get the evidence to Fort Stanton, and Crane will hang for what he has done. Kimimela reached out and took his hand. When this is over, if we survive, what will you do? Jacob was quiet for a long moment. I do not know. For 4 years, I have lived in the mountains, hiding from the world, hiding from pain. But these past weeks with you, I have remembered what it feels like to care about something beyond simple survival, to fight for something that matters. You could go back to your cabin. The cabin is ashes, and I think maybe that is fitting. That part of my life is over. I cannot go back to being the man I was before I met you. So you will be someone new. Maybe, if I can figure out who that is. He looked at her. What about you? If we save your people, what then? Kimimela smiled, though sadness touched the expression. I will help rebuild, teach the children, keep the old ways alive while learning the new ways we need to survive in a changing world. Father always said the Apache must be like water. Water does not fight against stone. It flows around, finds another path, but never stops moving forward. That is wise. Father was full of wisdom. I only wish I had listened more carefully when he was alive. She leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder. But I think he would approve of you. A white man who honors Apache ways, who fights for justice instead of gold. That is rare. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, until it was time for the watch to change. The next 3 days were a blur of hard riding and constant vigilance. They saw Crane's men twice, once from a distance as a group of riders crossed their trail miles behind them, and once much closer when they nearly rode into an ambush at a waterhole. Only Miguel's sharp eyes, spotting the glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel, saved them from riding straight into gunfire. They went around, adding hours to their journey, and heard later the frustrated shouts of the ambushers who had waited in the heat for nothing. The horses were nearly spent. The humans were not much better. They had been living on jerky and hardtack, stealing a few hours of sleep when they could, always moving, always looking over their shoulders. But on the afternoon of the fourth day, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they saw it. Sacred Canyon. It was not impressive from a distance, just another slash in the desert landscape, a crack in the earth where water had carved through stone over millennia. But as they approached, the scale became apparent. The canyon walls rose 300 feet on either side, red sandstone streaked with bands of lighter color, creating layers like pages in a book, written by time itself. The entrance is narrow, Kimimela said, wide enough for horses to pass single file. Inside, the canyon opens up. There are side passages, caves, places to shelter. And in the heart of the canyon, there is a chamber. That is where the map is. They entered the canyon as the sun touched the horizon, painting the rocks in shades of blood and fire. The temperature dropped immediately, the walls blocking the sun's warmth. Their horses' hoofbeats echoed strangely, the sound bouncing back and forth until it seemed like a dozen horses instead of 3. They had penetrated perhaps a quarter mile into the canyon when Miguel suddenly reined his horse to a halt. "Something is wrong," he said. "What?" Jacob asked, his hand moving to his rifle. "I smelled tobacco, fresh tobacco smoke. And there," Miguel pointed, "brass shell casings, new ones. Someone has been here recently. Many someones." Jacob dismounted and picked up one of the casings. It was indeed fresh, probably not more than a few hours old. He looked around with new awareness, studying the rocks above them, the shadows that could hide 100 men. "Crane," Kimimela said, her voice tight. "He is already here." As if her words had summoned them, men began to appear on the canyon rims above. 10, 15, 20 figures silhouetted against the dying light, all carrying rifles, all pointing down at the 3 riders below. A voice echoed through the canyon, amplified by the stone walls. "Welcome, Miss White River. I have been waiting for you." Thomas William Crane stepped out from behind a boulder onto a ledge 50 feet above them. He was dressed in a fine black suit, completely incongruous with the wild landscape, his silver hair gleaming in the sunset light. In his hand, he held a pistol, pointed casually but with clear intent. "Did you really think I would not anticipate your destination? I have known about Sacred Canyon for months. Your dear father mentioned it several times before he died. Begged me to spare it, actually, which only confirmed how important it must be." Jacob's mind raced. They were trapped. Men above, men behind at the canyon entrance. Ahead, who knew what other ambushes waited? The horses were exhausted. They could not outrun mounted pursuit. "Let them go, Crane," Kimimela shouted up. "Your quarrel is with me, not them." Crane laughed, a sound like ice breaking. "My quarrel is with anyone who threatens my plans. You, Miss White River, have become more than a nuisance. You have become a genuine problem. You have my documents. You know about the map. You must think you are very clever." "Clever enough to know you are a murderer and a thief," Kimimela replied. "Such harsh words. I prefer visionary and entrepreneur. The Apache are a dying people, girl. I am simply speeding the inevitable. The land belongs to those who can use it productively, not to savages who squat on fortunes without the intelligence to extract them. The land belongs to those whose ancestors are buried in it," Kimimela said. "Our treaty guarantees it. Your own government's law guarantees it. Laws can be changed. Treaties can be rewritten. All it takes is money and influence, which I have, and you do not." Crane gestured with his pistol. "Now I will make this simple. Give me the documents, tell me how to reveal the stone map, and I will let your companions ride away. You, of course, must stay, but their lives will be spared." "She stays, we stay," Jacob said flatly. "How noble. The savage-loving mountain man willing to die for a woman he barely knows. It would be touching if it were not so pathetic." Crane's voice hardened. "I am done negotiating. Pike, bring them up, dead or alive. I do not care which." Pike Jacobson appeared on the canyon floor behind them, leading a group of 6 men on foot. His shoulder was bandaged where Kimimela had shot him, and his face was twisted with rage and pain. "You are mine now, Makosa," Pike said. "Going to take my time with you. Make you regret putting your hands on me." Jacob, Kimamela, and Miguel dismounted and formed a tight triangle, backs together, weapons ready. It was a hopeless position, but they would not die on their knees. Then, from the shadows of a side passage, a voice rang out. "I think not, Crane. These people are under the protection of the United States Army." A figure stepped into the failing light. Colonel Benjamin Hatch, commander of Fort Stanton, dressed in full military uniform with 20 cavalry soldiers behind him. Their rifles were leveled not at Jacob and his companions, but at Pike and his men. Crane's face went white. "Hatch, what are you doing here? This is Indian agent business. You have no jurisdiction." "On the contrary, Mr. Crane, I have every jurisdiction when a civilian official is engaged in activities that threaten United States citizens and violate federal treaties." Hatch's voice was cold as winter iron. "I received information 3 days ago about your planned activities. Very detailed information, including the documents you thought you had safely locked in your office. You have been working with them?" Crane's voice rose in disbelief. "No, but I have been investigating you for 6 months, ever since reports reached me of irregularities in the Warm Springs agency accounts. When Miss White River and her companions raided your office, they inadvertently provided me the evidence I needed to act." Hatch turned to his men. "Sergeant Riley, place Mr. Crane under arrest. Charges are conspiracy to commit murder, theft of federal property, and treason." "You cannot do this!" Crane screamed. "I have friends in Washington. The governor himself authorized my actions." "Governor Morrison is also under arrest," Hatch said calmly. "Federal marshals took him into custody this morning. It seems his financial connections to the Silver Baron Mining Company were even more extensive than yours. He has been quite cooperative, actually, hoping to reduce his sentence. He has implicated you in everything." Crane's composure shattered completely. He raised his pistol, not at Hatch but at Kimamela. "If I hang, the Indian bitch dies first." Two things happened simultaneously. Miguel threw himself in front of Kimamela just as Crane fired. The bullet that should have struck her heart hit Miguel in the chest instead. And Jacob's rifle spoke, the heavy slug from his sharps catching Crane in the shoulder and spinning him backward. Crane fell from the ledge, tumbling end over end before crashing onto the canyon floor. He did not die immediately. Instead, he lay broken and bleeding, staring up at the darkening sky. Kimamela fell to her knees beside Miguel. Her brother looked up at her, blood spreading across his shirt, his breath coming in short gasps. "I told you," Miguel whispered. "I wanted to make things right." "You did," Kimamela said, tears streaming down her face. "You did, brother. You saved me. You saved everyone. Tell Mother when you see her. Tell her I remembered. That we are two halves of one soul. That I came back to my half. I will tell her, I promise." Miguel's hand fumbled at his neck, pulling free the broken turquoise butterfly pendant. He pressed it into Kimamela's hand, closing her fingers around it. "Make it whole," he whispered. "Make us whole." And then he was gone, his eyes going still and empty, the brother who had betrayed and then redeemed himself in the span of a few short days. Kimamela bent over him and sang the death song, the ancient words echoing through the canyon, carrying his spirit to the ancestors. Jacob stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, silent witness to her grief. When the song ended, Colonel Hatch approached. "I am sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "Your brother sent me information about Crane's plans. That is how I knew to come here. Without his warning, I would not have arrived in time. He saved 400 lives with his sacrifice." "It does not bring back the 8 he helped kill," Kimamela said bitterly. "No, but it prevents 400 more deaths. That has to count for something." They buried Miguel in the canyon in a place where the sun would touch his grave every morning. Kimamela said the words, consecrated the ground according to Apache custom. Pike and his men were taken into custody by Hatch's soldiers, and Crane, barely alive, was carried out on a stretcher to face trial. But the business of the canyon was not finished. "The map," Kimamela said as they stood in the chamber her father had discovered. "We still need to document it. Tomorrow is the winter solstice. The sun will shine at the right angle. I will sing the song. and the truth will be revealed. They made camp in the canyon that night, protected now by Hatch's soldiers. Jacob and Kimamela sat together away from the others, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "I am sorry about your brother," Jacob said. "He died with honor. In the end, that is all anyone can ask." Kimimela leaned against him. "What about you? When this is over, when the map is recorded and Crane is hanged and my people are safe, what will you do?" Jacob was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I have been thinking about that. For 4 years I hid from the world, told myself I did not need anyone, did not want to risk being hurt again. But these weeks with you, I have realized something." "What?" "That hiding from pain also means hiding from joy, from connection, from life itself. Nasha would not have wanted me to spend the rest of my days alone on a mountain. She would have wanted me to live, to love again if I could, to be part of the world, not separate from it." Kimimela turned to look at him. "What are you saying?" Jacob took her hand. "I am saying that when I paid a silver dollar for you, I thought I was buying your freedom. But really you bought mine. You showed me that I could still care, still fight for something beyond survival, still feel something other than grief." "Jacob, I am not asking you to marry me. Not yet. We have known each other barely 2 weeks. But I am asking if, when this is done, I can stay. Help your people rebuild. Learn more about Apache ways. See where this path leads for both of us." Kimimela smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her that was not touched by sorrow or fear. "My father had a saying, 'The mountain teaches us to stand alone, but the valley teaches us to stand together.' I think you have been on the mountain long enough. It is time for the valley." "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes." They kissed then, not with desperate passion, but with gentle promise. A beginning, not an ending. The next morning, as the sun rose on the winter solstice, they gathered in the sacred chamber. Kimimela positioned herself where her father had taught her to stand. As the first rays of sunlight struck the canyon wall, she began to sing. The song was old, older than memory, passed down through countless generations. Her voice rose and fell in patterns that seemed random, but were actually mathematically precise. The sound waves hit the rock walls and reflected back, creating harmonics and resonances. And as she sang, the ancient magic began to work. Dust fell from cracks in the stone that had been invisible moments before. Grooves and channels became visible, carved deep into the rock 1,000 years ago, and then deliberately filled with a mixture of clay and crushed stone that blended seamlessly with the surrounding surface. As the dust continued to fall, the map emerged. Not a simple drawing, but an incredibly detailed three-dimensional representation of the entire region. Mountain ranges carved in relief, rivers shown as channels, and marked with precision the boundaries of Apache land as defined by centuries of occupation. In the center, marked with a symbol of crossed thunderbolts, was the location of the silver mine. It sat squarely within the mapped Apache territory, with annotations in the ancient pictographic script explaining its sacred significance to the people. Colonel Hatch, who had brought an artist to record everything, stood with his mouth open in wonder. "I have never seen anything like this. The precision, the skill. This is not the work of savages. This is the work of master engineers and surveyors." "My ancestors were never savages," Kimimela said quietly. "They built civilizations while Europe was in darkness. They understood astronomy, mathematics, architecture. This is just one small example of their knowledge." Hatch nodded slowly. "And this proves beyond any doubt that the land claimed by Crane belongs to your people under the treaty. Without it and the documents you recovered from his office, we have everything we need." They spent hours documenting the map. The artist made detailed sketches from multiple angles, working methodically to capture every line and symbol. A military photographer whom Colonel Hatch had brought specifically for this purpose set up his large format camera and took several exposures. The magnesium flash powder illuminating the ancient markings in brilliant detail. By noon, they had everything they needed. They left the canyon, taking with them evidence that would change the course of history for the Apache people. Evidence carved in stone and written in a guilty man's own hand. The trial of Thomas William Crane took place 3 weeks later at Fort Stanton. It was brief. The evidence was overwhelming. Crane's own journal, read aloud in court, condemned him in his own words. The forged documents, the telegrams to Governor Morrison detailing their conspiracy, and the photographs and drawings of the Sacred Canyon map, proving that the land he claimed belonged to the Apache by right of ancient occupation and federal treaty. The jury, composed of Army officers, deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Sentence: death by hanging. Crane maintained his defiance to the end. As they led him to the gallows, he shouted about white superiority and manifest destiny and the waste of good land on inferior people. Nobody listened. Nobody cared. He had become irrelevant, a relic of a way of thinking that was slowly, too slowly, but inevitably being left behind. He hanged on a cold January morning. Jacob and Kimamela did not attend. They had better things to do. Governor Morrison, facing similar charges, chose to flee rather than face trial. He was last seen boarding a ship in Galveston bound for Mexico. Reports later surfaced that he died of yellow fever in Veracruz 6 months later. Nobody mourned. The orders for the massacre were countermanded. The cavalry stood down. 400 Warm Springs Apache lived to see another sunrise because 3 people refused to accept injustice, and 1 man sacrificed himself to redeem a betrayal. The Sacred Canyon map was declared a protected site by order of President Grant himself. The silver mine remained closed. The land returned to Apache control. The Silver Baron Mining Company collapsed, its investors losing fortunes when it became clear they would never access the ore they had paid for. And in the spring of 1877, 6 months after a mountain man paid $1 silver for a woman at a slave auction, 2 things happened that marked the true end of one story and the beginning of another. First, the Warm Springs Apache held a ceremony to honor their dead, including Samuel Delche and Miguel Santana. Kimamela sang the morning songs, and when she placed the 2 halves of the turquoise butterfly together on Miguel's grave, making the pendant whole again, there was not a dry eye in the gathering. Second, and perhaps more important, Kimamela White River and Jacob McCall were married in an Apache ceremony witnessed by Colonel Hatch, the elders of the tribe, and a gathering of friends that spanned 2 worlds. They built a new cabin together, not up in the isolated heights where Jacob had hidden for 4 years, but in the valley near the reservation, where they could be part of a community. Jacob taught Apache children how to track and hunt. Kimamela opened a school teaching both Apache traditions and the English language and mathematics that her father had insisted were necessary for survival in a changing world. On their first anniversary, Jacob took out the silver dollar that he had kept safe through everything, the coin that had started it all. He looked at it for a long moment, then smiled and put it away in a small wooden box. "What are you thinking?" Kimamela asked. "I am thinking that was the best dollar I ever spent. Not because I bought you, I did not buy you. I bought a chance to do something right, a chance to fight for justice, a chance to feel alive again." "And was it worth it?" Jacob pulled her close. "Every cent, and more than I can ever repay." But there was one more chapter to the story, one that would not be revealed until decades later. In the ranch house in 1921, the old man finished his tale. The fire had burned low. Outside, the winter darkness was complete. Young James sat transfixed, the silver dollar still clutched in his hand. "So that is the story of this coin," Jacob said, his voice rough with age and memory. $1. It bought your grandmother's freedom. It bought me a reason to live. It bought justice for 400 people. And in the end, it bought me 44 years of happiness I thought I would never have again." 44 years, James asked. "But grandmother died last year." "Yes," Jacob said softly. "Pneumonia took her last winter. We had 44 good years together. 4 children, 12 grandchildren. You among them. A whole life built on the foundation of that single silver dollar." He reached out and closed James's fingers around the coin. "Now it is yours. Not the coin itself, though you can keep that if you want, but the lesson it carries. Sometimes the most important things in life cost almost nothing. Just courage. Just the willingness to act when action is needed, even if the odds seem impossible." "What should I do with it?" James asked. "Whatever seems right when the moment comes. You will know, the same way I knew, standing in that muddy street in Santa Fe, that I had to act, that some things are worth more than money, more than safety, more than comfort. Jacob leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 83 years. Now go on, let an old man rest. I have told you what I needed to tell you. The rest is up to you. James stood, but hesitated at the door. Grandpa, do you have any regrets? The old man smiled, an expression that made the decades fall away and revealed the young man he had been. Only one. I wish I had found the courage to care sooner. I wish I had not wasted 4 years hiding in the mountains. But that is a small regret compared to all the joy that came after. Thank you for the story. Thank you for listening. Now go. And remember, the dollar in your hand is not just a coin. It is a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. Use that knowledge wisely. James left, and Jacob sat alone by the dying fire. On the mantel beside him was a photograph, faded now but still clear. A younger Jacob and Kimimela on their wedding day, both smiling, both looking toward a future they could not yet see but faced together with courage and love. He reached up and touched the frame gently. I kept my promise, Kim. I told our story. I made sure it would not be forgotten. A mountain man and an Apache woman, changing the world $1 at a time. The fire crackled. Outside, the winter wind sang songs that sounded, if you listen carefully, like the ancient melodies of a people who had survived everything history threw at them and emerged stronger for it. And in a small wooden box beside the photograph, a silver dollar gleamed softly in the firelight. Worn smooth from handling, dated 1876, worth $1 in currency, but priceless in memory. The story was finished, but its echoes would carry forward through generations, a testament to the truth that dignity cannot be bought, justice cannot be sold, and sometimes the things we think we are purchasing turn out to be the things that purchase us, freeing us from the prisons we build for ourselves out of grief and fear and isolation. $1 silver. The worst bargain and the best investment Jacob McCall ever made. The coin that bought nothing and everything. The dollar that changed a life, saved a people, and proved that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can echo through time like thunder in a canyon, growing louder with each retelling until they become legend. And legends, unlike men, never truly die. They just wait, patient as stone, for the right moment and the right listener to bring them back to life again. The fire went out, the old man slept, and the coin rested in its box, waiting for the next chapter of its story to begin.